Hello world, I'm Whitney Bandel and welcome to another video from my HTML and CSS course. In this video we will be looking at your midterm project. So what you can do to take a look at the midterm project is you can sign into Canvas, and then at the bottom of week 2 you'll find a link to the midterm project. And what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you start thinking about this project and kind of coming up with how you can kind of organize the structure of your project and put everything together. So to start off with, we're going to just kind of read through the description. Midterm project objective: demonstrate proficiency coding HTML and CSS by hand using a text editor. Assignment: for this project you will be required to make a 3-page personal portfolio website. Your website should be formatted into a 1-column layout. For this project it is alright to use some placeholder content. This project is to help you with developing your own personal portfolio. At this time you may not have a whole lot of work to put into your portfolio. This project will serve as a foundation that you can use and continue to develop throughout your time studying at JCCC. So in the past, when I used to have students do a midterm project, I used to have them do a research project, which is actually what you're doing for your final project instead. I used to have it so that way people would do 2 research projects, and what one of the other professors in the department tried out in her classes, she had students doing their own personal portfolio projects, which I think is a really good idea. I've had a lot of students who are exiting the program and they've learned all of this content, but they haven't necessarily given themselves time to actually put together their own portfolio. And so we've been really thinking that giving you an opportunity to create a portfolio as part of your coursework will give you a good foundation to start thinking about that. And then as you go along throughout your studies, you can always go back and you can add to it, you can kind of modify it and change it. For this project, it's okay for you to kind of start using the foundations of what you know based off of the homework assignments and really kind of using that structure from the Pacific Trails or the yoga studio, and then kind of modify that to fit into your portfolio. And again, as you continue to learn more, you can always go back and you can modify it. I'm going to show you some examples in a little bit of what previous students have done so you can kind of get an idea of what the expectations are. As I have written in here, you can put placeholder information. Some of you may have portfolio work already, and a lot of it sort of depends on your field of study. For example, I know some of you might be graphic designers, and so you might have portfolio work already that you've been creating in your other classes, and it might be easy to put that all together. Or you might already have a portfolio of work from just your own kind of side practices, versus I've also had students who are maybe taking this class as more of an elective or a requirement for a different area in computer science. And in that case, I would still suggest that you think about putting together a portfolio, but you might think about it in a slightly different way. Think of it as a way of being able to demonstrate the skills that you have learned and plan on learning throughout your time here. So if you don't already have a portfolio of work, what you might consider doing is having a description of each of the different courses that you're going to be taking. You could have kind of a placeholder for the different projects that you plan on completing. For example, in this class, you're going to have a midterm project and a final project. Usually for each of the classes you're going to take, you're going to have something that's going to be able to demonstrate what you've learned in that class. And so the idea is that you could then take this website and be able to show it to a future employer and be able to demonstrate what you've learned. So some of this might end up being a placeholder. You should be able to go online and be able to look at a description of the different classes that you plan to be taking. I've also had some students though who wanted to make their website a little bit more based off of kind of a side interest, something that they do already, like I have some students who have YouTube channels, and so maybe you would want to make your website fit into that. I don't necessarily have a requirement specifically for how it has to look, that it has to be necessarily a professional portfolio that you could use for job interviews. I do think that that would be probably the most beneficial use of it, so you can use it in the future. But if you do have some plans of how you might want to tailor this to fit content that you already have, or if there's something that you have in mind, just send me an email, contact me, and we can talk about how to make that work the most efficiently. All right, so requirements. Wireframe tags include a header, nav, main, and footer. Navigation should be coded as an unordered list. Liquid layout, it should not be the full width of the screen, and it should be centered. What I'm really looking for is for you to be able to demonstrate that you understand how to add margins. So I really would like to see you add some sort of wrapper container to your code, so that way you are showing that you know how to group together information and that you are able to add the margins. So that way it resizes based off of the window screen. Size measurements should be in percentages. Text measurements should be in ems. Small measurements for padding, borders, and margins can be in pixels, but only if smaller than 10 pixels. I'm pretty flexible on this. I'm okay with kind of up to maybe 50 pixels or so. It sort of depends on the content. I do know that adding height dimensions and having those be percentages can sometimes throw things off. But really you want to have as much set to a percentage as possible. Content, each page should have sufficient content to fill a regular piece of paper of a single space text. Really the idea here is I want you to have enough content that I can resize the page and I can see what is actually happening with your layout. So if you need to add placeholder images, if you need to add kind of placeholder lorem ipsum or something, that's fine. Just start thinking about what you would ideally like to have on those pages. So again, with the portfolio page, you could have different headings that say the class section, maybe a description for what the main objectives of that class are. Have a placeholder where you could have an image of a project, maybe a screen capture. You could even have a link to maybe a PDF file or something of the actual project that you worked on. You could have a description of what your actual hand was in working on that project. But you can have placeholder content if needed, but you should have a sufficient amount to work with. Use a common wireframe on each page to make them consistently organized and styled. So you're gonna have 3 pages. And in the past, I have had students do 4 pages. I found students were sort of struggling to figure out what to do with the home page. And so I've sort of combined the home page with the about page. So the examples I'm going to show you actually have 4 pages, but what I'm going to have you do is actually do 3 to make it a little bit easier. So the home page is going to be more of an about page. It should include information about yourself. It could be, these are all suggestions, so you don't necessarily have to use these, but these are a really good starting point. You could include a biography, you could include a statement, you could have your resume, you could put different social media links. For example, I have students who are in the digital media side of things, and so they might have a YouTube account, they might have a SoundCloud account, you might have an Instagram account or something else that you might want to link to. You might want to link to LinkedIn. You might also have like a link to GitHub to show some examples of your code. So all of those would be kind of good things that you might consider linking. You might also consider adding a list of your different skills, software proficiencies. Again, you can have an overview of your courses that are taken. Portfolio page should give demonstrations of your body of work. It's good to include images, dates, titles, descriptions. The more information, the more it's going to be helpful, especially for something like I've had students who are in the game art program, and they might be working on a project with other people, or they could be taking, like, let's say they're taking assets that other people created, but they are working on a particular part of how to implement kind of the interactivity of what's going on in it. Being able to help describe what your hand is in the project is going to help it, so that way when people are looking at it, they're going to know what the context is and kind of how to perceive that information. The last page is going to be a course objectives page. I want you to include the course description and objectives for the class. You can find this by going to the JCCC catalog, and this is linked in the syllabus, so you should be able to find it there. I also have it linked several different places on Canvas, but if you also go to just catalog.jccc.edu, you can take a look at current descriptions for the catalog. I'm just going to go to web development, web 110, and then here we have a list. Now I do have, and we'll get to this in just a little bit, I have a list of things that I would like for you to have. A couple of those things are having an unordered list and an ordered list. This page is a great place to be able to check off some of those items. You don't have to put necessarily everything. What I kind of like to see is this top part of information. The top part is really great. It gives you a bunch of information that you can kind of put in a list, the title, number, the term, all of that information. The objectives are really good for being able to kind of explain. This also, again, it kind of helps give context. If people are looking at this website as part of your portfolio, they can kind of get an idea of what all you were covering in the class when you learned how to do this project. Now, I have had some students do kind of this folder section of the objectives going into all the different competencies. That's fine if you want to do that. It is a little bit challenging to create these lists inside of lists. If you want to know how to do that, you can always ask me and I can go over how to do that. Once we get more towards the final project, I'm going to explain how to do that to everyone anyways. But you don't necessarily have to do this whole list, but you do need to make sure that you include at least this top information. Links. Create links as needed for the content and usability of your website. Include at least one example of each type. So this is in addition to the navigation link. So you need to have a link to an external page. A great place for that would be linking to the actual catalog description that's on JCCC's website. Link to an internal page. This is one that people tend to forget to include. So for example, you could have a link on your homepage that has your sort of about information, and then you could include a link to go to the portfolio that would be a link in addition to the navigation link. So it needs to link to another internal page. You need to have an email link. Good place for that would be your footer. Ordered list. On any page, include at least 5 items. Unordered list. In addition to the navigation, on any page, include at least 5 items. Again, great places for that information is the course objectives page. I'd like to have images on at least one page, at least one per page. And this is one I often get questions about. You can technically use the same images. So with the homework assignments, they have you start to include these hero images that kind of change from page to page. If you want to do something like that, you can. If you want to sort of have an image that's consistent on the header for each page, you could do that as well. If you want to, you could have a logo or something, and you're free to kind of think about the type of branding that you've already done for yourself. So if you want to include any of that, you can. I would suggest having, let's say, like an image of yourself on your homepage, so that way people have an idea of who it is the page is for. You could use like a picture of the campus or campus logo or something, maybe on the course objectives page. Since this is a personal portfolio, you should have an easy enough time being able to go and find images based off of what you have. Style sheets, link all pages to an external style sheet, name styles.css. Do not include any embedded or inline styles. Comments. I want to see your name, date, and subject at the top of every file. So what I'd like for you to do when you're naming your files is name them like midterm1.html, midterm2.html, midterm3.html, and then include the subject at the top in the comment, so that way I'm going to know which page is for which. So that way midterm1.html, you could have a comment, your name, date, and then you could say homepage. And then for midterm2.html, you could say name, date, portfolio. So that'll kind of make it a little bit easier for me to keep track of them. The reason why I want you to name them midterm 1, midterm 2, midterm 3 is it's going to be easier when I'm validating for me to easily just kind of switch between the numbers. Another thing that I'd like for you to do is to add comments throughout your CSS files to kind of organize them. You don't have to comment every single thing, but if you do have any sort of ID or a class, it's a good idea to list those. Anything where you're adding a lot of detail to your style is a good idea to kind of add comments. And these comments are going to be helpful for you. It's also just a good practice to get into, so that way if you are handing code off to someone else, they have an idea of what it is that they're getting. Proper indentation, correct spelling and grammar, HTML and CSS, code validate, design, use a simple but professional color scheme that is easy to read. Most of what you're going to be graded on is going to be the code of things. There are a few points that are designated for design. A lot of what I'm looking for is the fonts that you're using. We've talked about how sans serif fonts are easier to read on digital devices rather than serif fonts. So think about which fonts are going to be more ideal for people to read. Think about your spacing. Think about the colors that you're using. Are the colors really harsh? Do they have a good contrast to them to make it easier for people to see? After this, I have a couple of different links. So first one, how to build a stunning portfolio website as a web developer, 10 awesome web developer portfolios, 20 memorable web design portfolio examples. So I wanted to link these so that way you could get kind of inspired by ideas of what other professionals are doing. I'm going to show you some other examples too, though, because I think it can be sort of overwhelming for you to look at what people who have been working in the industry have been doing for a very long time versus maybe somebody who is in kind of the same spot that you are currently. So you can definitely take a look at these, and I would always encourage you to go and look at other people's work. Keep track of things that they're doing that you like, so that way you can kind of use those ideas for your own work. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see the actual rubric. So each of these are kind of broken down into different points. So you can actually, before you even submit your project, you can kind of check off to see that you have everything. You can kind of get an idea of which things are going to be worth more points. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple of different examples of portfolio websites that I think show a variety of nice things that you could kind of consider using, whether it's now or even in the future. So this is a website of a professor that I used to study under, Bart Woodstrup. And what I really like about his portfolio is he includes a lot of descriptions. A lot of his work deals with new media, where he is creating either performance-based work or interactive work. And so in his case, it's really important to document the work and write out and explain what's happening. Let's say that you're like a photographer or a painter. You might have a bunch of different pieces of work where instead of describing every single piece, you might instead have an artist statement that kind of goes over the general work that you're creating. But in some cases, it might make more sense for you to include a description about that particular piece. So again, like if somebody is taking classes in game art, or if there's kind of different projects that you're creating, this might make more sense. So on his homepage, he has these pictures that are kind of showing different projects. If you hover over them, they tell the different titles. On the bottom left, we have the footer with different forms of contact, social media links. He kind of divides his work into different types of pieces, so performance pieces, installation pieces, video, other types of work, and then info. And so here we have curriculum vitae. That's kind of a longer version of a resume. So he just includes kind of a PDF file. I actually really like this too, because this is a good example of using infographics in your resume to kind of share information about what you know. So it's kind of an interesting piece. I'm going to try to go to some of these examples though. So here we kind of have a multi-layered approach. So we have the title of the project, we have a description of what it is, the date. Some of these might have multiple dates depending on how many times they were performed. There's video documentation of the performance. There's a couple images to kind of show what this might look like. So I really like this as kind of an example. This is somebody that I studied with when I was in school, and her portfolio is kind of split into a couple of different areas. She is a painter, but then she also is a teacher, and so she uses her website to show examples of her own work, but she also has examples of her student work, so that makes it a little bit different. And she has kind of several pages that are designated to organizing information in kind of different ways. So this first page is just images of her paintings. Then she also has another option to look at her work where she has different descriptions of her work. She has a sketchbook, CV, student work with descriptions. So you could go and you could find out about these different projects. Artist statement. Something you might consider is having a blog. If you were doing a lot of events where you needed to share information about things that were coming up, you might include a blog. I would caution you, don't necessarily add a blog unless you're going to update it with information. It's not always the best to have a blog if it's really out of date. You want to make sure that all the information that you have is going to stay current on your website. If it's not going to be maintained and not stay current, it's better to just not include it. And then you might also consider having, well, you should have some sort of contact, whether it's having contact on a page that's completely separate, or if it's having a contact page that's part of your homepage. It could even be a link, like just to the email. Since this is such a small portfolio website for now, I wouldn't worry about having a contact page in particular, but you should have some way that people can contact you. And hers is pretty direct. She has her email link, and there's actually an icon to click on emailing. So those are some examples of people that I know who are working a little bit more in digital media and fine art. I wanted to try to show an example of different works to kind of a range of people kind of at different places in their career. Something that I've noticed, at least with the web developers that I know, it almost seems as if the best web developers I know spend the least amount of time on their own websites. So I do know of some people where they do really great work, but their website is just a single page. They might have a link to their GitHub. But I would encourage you to have some platform where people can go and look at examples of your work. This is a student that graduated a couple years back when I was at another school. And he kind of specializes a little bit. His background was sort of animation and video work, but he also works with code. So I wanted to kind of take a look at his website and kind of how he's organized information. Since he works with video, he's included this demo reel. A demo reel is a really great way to showcase your work all in one place. It doesn't even necessarily just have to be video work. You could even just create a demo reel with images, like a slideshow of different pictures of your work. And then he has these different tags for being able to look at different examples of projects. So this is kind of a nice way of being able to sort through different topics. And then we have some links here. Browse by project, artist biography, which I believe all of these are basically the same buttons here. Like get in touch, I believe, takes you still to the contact. And then just kind of simple information, social media links. You can fill this out, send it in. And what I like about this too is you definitely get a sense of a very particular kind of color scheme and branding that he's going for. And so I want you to think about, you might not have an idea exactly of what you want, but at least start thinking of kind of a starting point. Like what are the fonts that you sort of gravitate towards? What are the different colors that you gravitate towards? You might have some ideas already, but this would be a really good time to kind of test things out and think about it. This is another student that I knew at another school, graduated a couple years ago. They started more in animation and video, and they've sort of worked more towards web development. And his site is actually through GitHub, and he kind of keeps it a little bit short, but what I do like about this is it kind of is just straight to the point. We have a little about section. It gives us some information. I really like this, kind of showing the different skills, listing off the skills that he has, but then also kind of demonstrating his proficiency in those skills by actually showing how he's creating these icons that are kind of interactive. So saying that he knows JavaScript, Photoshop, and then he has a portfolio of work. So you could take a look at these, contact. So all of these kind of navigation items, they're all listed on the same page, and these just kind of jump you down to these sections. And then here we have the social media links as well. So just kind of short, simple, straight to the point. As kind of another example, I wanted to show you kind of one of the versions of pages that I've made. I'm always kind of tweaking around and playing around with how I organize my work. But you might consider having some sort of landing page. Here I have a description about the different areas that I've created work in. I've split up my work based off of if it sort of gravitates a little bit more towards design work or if it gravitates a little bit more towards fine art. Then if I click on my name, I have this statement. I have links to my LinkedIn profile, my CV, artist statement, philosophy of teaching. I also have a teaching portfolio that's a separate site. If you were to click on fine art, I have a gallery of different images. I have videos of different works. So plenty of ways for you to kind of think about organizing your information. For me, this sort of design is integral to my work. So I use a lot of these colors. I use a lot of these images of kind of circuitry that I used in the pieces that I made when I was working on my thesis research. So I tied this all together as part of my site to make it kind of fit the work I was creating. Now, the next pages I'm going to show you, these are going to be examples of student projects that were created in previous courses, and these were meant to be a 4-page website. And I started to realize that students were having a hard time filling out the homepage and having enough content. So even though these have 4 pages, think about how you could essentially take the same amount of content and just put it in the 3 pages. So I'm going to show you a couple of different examples. You'll probably notice a lot of these, their home pages are kind of empty, and that's fine. That's because they were needing to kind of put all the information together. So here, this person chose to go along with a biography, portfolio, They have some examples of links to their SoundCloud since they've done a lot of work with composing. Course objectives. And let's see if I can get this to resize. So I am looking for these to behave responsively. So kind of take that into consideration. This student works in, or is taking classes in the game art section. So he was really trying to think about what the aesthetics are of gaming, and in particular retro gaming. So that's where a lot of the different colors came from and kind of the different textures. So you might consider that as well. And in this case, since the student was kind of just starting off in the program, they used this opportunity to instead create placeholder content. So they have a place to put an image, they have title, date, place for a description. That's completely fine. This just gives me enough to know how this would be kind of organized for the future. How is it going to behave? And it still works really great as a template. Here we have an about section, we have programming skills, software proficiencies, social media, information about the course. So here we have just a nice image on the front, a little bit of a description, about information, different links to LinkedIn, resume information, skills, tools, technology. Here we have Clifton Strengths. If you've taken that at all in any of your classes, you could add that. Course objectives again, portfolio. So this one's actually kind of designated by the different kind of areas. So here we have web development, graphic design, corporate visual identity, here we have kind of a little hello page. Let's see, about section, kind of basic information, social media links, course objectives, portfolio. So in this case, to kind of make things a little easier, they were using actual projects from this class for their portfolio, which that's fine too. You could do something like that. Here we have a landing page. Let's see. About, and you can kind of see this person used some of the same styles from the assignments as sort of a jumping off point. Just make sure that when you are working on this site, if you do want to use that as a starting point, make sure that you're actually exploring and trying to change your design and make it your own, which I think they've done in a lot of different ways in other areas as well. Portfolio information, so they're kind of going and they're talking a little bit more about their individual skills in different areas. That's fine too. It doesn't have to be like a literal portfolio. Whoops. Here we just have kind of basic statement, image, social media. Here we have bio, known software, courses taken, work, course information, portfolio. I like this one as an example. Here we have like the class, a bit of a description about it, a link to it, taking a look at another kind of skill, working with CAD, an example of the type of work that they would have modeled and 3D printed, Linux, HTML, and CSS. So you could definitely do something like that. Here we have another design. This is the home page, kind of giving some basic information. Here's an example of some of those internal links that would just take you to some of the same places as the navigation. Portfolio. So these are some examples of working with imagery in Photoshop, Illustrator examples. And these are always things where you just need enough information to fill up the page. You can always go back to this and add stuff in the future. Course objectives. I think that's everything on that. So those are some examples of different things that you could think about. What I like about all these examples is I can tell that everyone's taken the time to think about the different fonts that they're using. So thinking about the fonts they're going to use in their navigation, thinking about how the different headings are going to show a visual hierarchy and they're going to build off of each other, not just have the exact same font for everything. Thinking about their colors and creating colors that are going to work together and also represent that person. Like this one I think is a good example of working with color. All these colors feel very much tied to the subject matter. In some cases they might be hard to read, so you do want to kind of take a step back and think about what it might look like from somebody else's perspective. And a great place to think about color is you can always use one of those websites where we were looking at color, and you can always kind of start with an image. Find a photo of nature. Nature always has colors that are going to kind of look well together, so you could use that as a starting point. Trying to see. I'm not sure where this person came up with their color scheme, but I can definitely tell that a lot of these students kind of put a lot of thought into their colors. And again, you might have someone else take a look at your colors. Like, for example, I think this is a little bit hard to read. It's not impossible, but this light gray on the white, it looks really nice, but it might be just a little bit hard to read. This looks really good color-wise. This looks really cohesive, having all of the different grays. And it also matches the images, too. And design is such a small part of the actual assignment. You don't have to get too caught up in it, but you can always ask me and I can give you some advice on it if you're curious. All right, so that should cover everything for the midterm project. You can definitely contact me and ask me for help with trying to figure out how you want to organize the information. I would suggest that for your kind of homepage, it would be a good idea if you can to include an image. It could be an image of yourself. It could be an image of some of your work. That's up to you. You don't necessarily have to have an image of yourself if you don't want to. Consider having some sort of way of representing information about you, whether it's putting a link to your resume, putting your maybe a summary of your resume on your page. It could be putting a link to LinkedIn. You could have a biography or a statement giving some information about you. It could be information about what you've done previously or what you would like to do next. You could have links to other sources, social media. And then with your portfolio page, it's really kind of up to you how you want to present it. I didn't show this example, but I have had a student who did an example where it wasn't their own portfolio page as far as their professional work, but it was kind of their own side work of kind of projects that they like to work on. They like to build a lot of models, and so they were documenting a project that they had worked on doing Lego modeling. So if there was a project that you've been working on, again, like if you have a YouTube channel or something that you're currently running, you could always make your website based off of that project if you wanted to. It doesn't necessarily have to be a professional portfolio page. All right, so that's going to be everything for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me and we can kind of work things out.